My daughter-in-law leaned across the table, smiling sweetly as she said, "After New Year, we'll have her placed. It's already in motion." My heart clenched, but I didn't flinch. Decades of sacrifice had taught me to breathe through betrayal. Quietly, I began gathering proof, every whisper and paper trail, knowing one day her own words would undo her. That moment was just the beginning of a storm neither she nor my son expected. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Houston's autumn air had a thin bite to it, though not the kind of chill that made you shiver, more like a quiet whisper that said the seasons were turning. As I walked up the curved stone driveway of my son Lyle's house in River Oaks, I felt that whisper turning sharp inside me. The neighborhood was grand, lined with manicured lawns and polished cars, yet it seemed colder than the November air. His house stood like a statement more than a home, its tall windows gleaming in the dusk of Thanksgiving evening. I clutched the casserole dish I'd brought, its warmth pressing into my palms. I had baked it the way Lyle used to love when he was a boy, when the kitchen of our old Houston bungalow was filled with steam and chatter. Tonight, no one came to the door to help. I rang the bell, and the sound echoed too long, like I was standing outside a museum rather than my son's house. When the door finally opened, Celine appeared first. Her perfume drifted out before her words did, sharp and flowery, not warm. "Oh, Darlene," she said, her smile wide but stopping short of her eyes. She stepped aside without touching me. I walked in, greeted by the faint notes of jazz music and the overwhelming shine of a chandelier. Everything gleamed, but not a single photograph on the wall showed me. I saw Lyle's high school graduation picture, Selena's university award, even baby Avon in his baptism suit, but not one frame of me holding my son, not one memory of the years I poured myself into him. I swallowed hard and followed Celine into the dining room. The long table stretched across the space like a runway decorated with gold-rimmed china and heavy centerpieces. The aroma of turkey and pecan pie should have felt like home, yet it pressed down on me like a burden. My seat waited at the end near the bathroom door, set with a smaller napkin than the others. Guests already filled the main seat, Celine's parents, her sister, even a business partner of Lyle's. I slid into my place quietly, the hum of conversations flowing right over me. When the toast began, Lyle raised his glass toward the table, but not once did his eyes meet mine. I forced myself to sit straight, hands folded, face calm. Yet inside the sting was sharp, like I had been set aside, placed out of sight, but close enough to fetch if needed. The first insult came wrapped in laughter. One of Celine's relatives chuckled and said, "Well, at least the seat's convenient. Right by the restroom, no long walks for anyone." Heads turned toward me, and I felt the burn rise in my cheeks. A few laughed politely, others avoided my gaze. No one spoke up. I smiled faintly, choosing silence over a scene, but my dignity bent like an old reed under a heavy wind. I thought of how many times I had set the best chair for Lyle's place at home, saving him the spot, with the view of the window, giving him the best piece of chicken. Now here I was, tucked beside a door that swung open and closed, with every guest excusing themselves. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My silence was my armor, though the betrayal echoed louder than any word could. Dinner carried on with forced cheer. Silverware chimed, glasses clinked, and the room pulsed with talk of investments, vacations, and Celine's latest charity gala. My words shrank smaller and smaller until they disappeared altogether. And then Celine, with her perfect posture and a smirk tucked in her voice, leaned toward the group. "At least she's good for watching Avon," she said, her fork tapping her plate like punctuation. The air stilled for me. My heart clenched, but I didn't let my face show the crack. The words landed harder than the seat insult. She had reduced me to a babysitter, nothing more. Worse than the remark was Lyle's silence. My son sat there nodding at something his business partner said, not lifting his head, not stopping his wife. I looked at Avon across the room, his small hands gripping a toy car, his eyes curious and untouched by all this. He was the only one who still looked at me without judgment, the last anchor in a house that no longer felt like mine. My lips curved in a faint smile for him alone, though inside I felt the ice settle deeper. As laughter returned around me, I sat still, my fork idle. I let Cellini's words hang in the air like smoke, not swatted away, not challenged. Pain pressed against my chest, yet I held it close, folding it into a quiet resolve. This was my son's house, but my place here had already been chosen, defined not by love or memory, but by convenience and dismissal. I smiled faintly at Avon, but deep inside I felt the cold realization that my place in this house had already been decided by someone else. The house was still alive with the clinking of glasses and the hum of laughter even after the plates had been cleared. I moved slowly between the dining room and the kitchen, carrying stacks of dishes that felt heavier than they should have. My arms ached, but I kept going because that's what I'd always done, kept moving, kept quiet. From the corner of the kitchen, I could hear Celine and a few of her friends laughing in the living room. Their voices carried easily through the polished hallways, bouncing off the marble floors like echoes in a museum. I caught phrases, but not full sentences, and every burst of laughter tightened something in my chest. It struck me then, I wasn't a guest in my son's home. I wasn't family in the way I used to be. I was the help. I wiped down the counters, keeping my back straight, even though my knees begged for rest. In the glossy photos that lined the hallway, there were pictures of Lyle at the beach, Celine in evening gowns, and even one of little Avon in his Halloween costume. But not one photo had me in it. Not one smile framed in silver included the woman who had once carried the weight of all their beginnings. I stacked the last dish on the drying rack and leaned for a moment against the sink. The water was running warm, steam fogging the window that looked out to Cellini's manicured lawn. My reflection in the glass looked tired, but the set of my jaw told me I was not defeated. I turned off the faucet and straightened, just as Cellini's laughter drifted nearer like a current pulling closer to shore. Cellini entered the kitchen with a wine glass dangling from her fingers. Her friends lingered behind her in the hallway, but she didn't bother lowering her voice. "You know," she said casually, her words smooth like honey but sharp at the edges, "maybe it's time to think about proper care for the elderly." The words struck me harder than any insult at that Thanksgiving table. My breath caught, but I forced my hands to stay steady as I dried a plate. She sipped her wine eyes, flicking over me like she was appraising furniture. "It's just practical." She continued, her tone as breezy as if she were commenting on the weather. "There are places, nice ones, of course, where people like her can be looked after. It would give us all peace of mind." Her friends giggled, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. Not one of them corrected her. Not one of them reminded her that I was standing just a few feet away, well within earshot. My heart pounded so hard I thought the plate in my hand might slip. I kept my chin high, forcing myself not to react, because I knew that's what she wanted. Inside, though, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a joke. She wanted me gone. She wanted me tucked away somewhere, out of sight, out of mind, where I would no longer disturb her perfectly curated life. I placed the plate on the counter gently, silently, but my fingers trembled. Celine smiled at me over her glass as if daring me to challenge her, and then turned back to her friends. Their voices carried down the hall as they left me alone with the echo of her words. Later, when the house quieted and Cellini's friends had gone, I found myself in the corner of the living room. The fire crackled faintly, but it gave no warmth. Lyle sat in his leather chair, scrolling on his phone, his face lit by the blue glow of the screen. I wanted to believe he hadn't heard his wife's remark. I wanted to believe he would defend me. But then Selina reappeared still in her silk dress, her perfume trailing behind her. She leaned against the doorway and said lightly, "I was just telling the girls earlier. Maybe it's time we start looking into options for your mother. It's too much for her living on her own." I held my breath, waiting, praying for my son to look up, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He only lowered his eyes, his thumb still moving across the phone screen. His silence pressed down on me like a stone. That silence was sharper than her words. I felt something inside me splinter, then not loudly, but deeply. For years I had carried him through sickness, through fear, through every scraped knee and broken heart. I had defended him from the world, yet in this moment he couldn't lift a single word in my defense. Celine smirked slightly, as if satisfied, then walked away. Lyle never looked up. I sat there in the flicker of the fire, tasting the bitterness of betrayal in the back of my throat. That night, lying in the guest room, I couldn't sleep. The sheets were too smooth, too stiff, smelling faintly of lavender detergent. My body lay still, but my mind refused to rest. Celine's words played over and over, each repetition, tightening a knot in my chest. I thought of Lyle's silence, how it said more than 1,000 words could. The ceiling above me was painted a perfect white, without cracks, without flaws, and yet I stared at it like it might give me answers. The house around me was quiet now, the laughter and chatter faded into nothing. But inside me, the noise grew louder. I began to connect the dots, her casual cruelty, his silent consent, the missing photos on the wall, the seat by the bathroom. None of it was accidental. It was a design. I turned to my side, pulling the blanket up under my chin. My hands felt cold, though the room was warm. In the distance, I thought I heard Avon's small voice from his room, a sleepy murmur that reminded me of the only warmth left in this place. But even that couldn't chase away the dread gathering inside me. I realized then that Celine's remark was not casual at all. It was the first step, the opening move in something far darker. And my son's silence had given her permission. As I stared at the ceiling that night, I realized Celine's words weren't casual at all. They were the opening move of something far darker. I woke to the thin light of a gray Houston morning and the soft percussion of cabinets opening and closing downstairs. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender spray and new paint, like a hotel, trying too hard to seem warm. The quilt was the kind you buy in sets, perfectly folded, perfectly indifferent. I lay still and listened to Celine's brisk footsteps crossing the hardwood, the clink of a spoon in a mug, the easy laugh that floated up the stairs as if last night had been nothing at all. My body felt heavy with the residue of her words, but my mind had sharpened in the dark. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat for a breath, studying the room's careful emptiness. No books, no throw of mine, no photograph of Lyle and me from the years when a scraped knee could be fixed with a song. This was a holding space, not a welcome. Still, I smoothed the sheets, made the pillows neat, and told myself to move with quiet dignity today. I would not dissolve. I would see. I would remember every small thing. I opened the closet and found a row of empty hangers, the kind hotels use to discourage theft, their small plastic heads locked in place. My sweater looked like a visitor among them. On the nightstand, a clock glowed, 7:12, in an icy blue. I've always associated with waiting rooms. Even the rug, pale and geometric, felt like it belonged to a catalog more than to a life. I rubbed warmth into my arms and let the quiet teach me what it could. This house valued order, evidence of effort outcomes that could be photographed. It did not value roots. Roots are messy, and they hold even when storms come. I kept my roots inside my ribs. I would keep them no matter how tidy the floor above them looked. A soft knock, then a whisper. Grandma. I opened the door to find Avon, barefoot, hair a messy halo, clutching 2 forks and a paper plate shielded with foil. He patted in like a secret. "Mom's busy," he said, conspiratorial and sweet, so I brought us pumpkin pie. He set the plate on the dresser and peeled back the foil to reveal a lopsided slice crowned with a dollop of real whipped cream. We sat side by side on the edge of the bed knees, almost touching, and ate from the same plate as the house hummed beyond the closed door. He told me about a school project on the solar system and how he'd picked Saturn because the rings looked like someone kept their promises. I laughed softly at that, a sound I hadn't made since yesterday, and tucked a strand of his hair behind his ear. He leaned his shoulder against mine without thinking. The sweetness of cinnamon and nutmeg lingered in the air, and for a few minutes the room felt claimed as if his small presence signed my name, somewhere this house had tried to erase. "Save some for later," I said, but he nudged the plate toward me. "You need it more," he whispered. I swallowed around a sudden ache and chose to believe him. He told me with the round seriousness of 8 that he'd been practicing tying his shoes without the bunny ears and asked if I could time him later. I promised I would. We talked about the stray cat that visited the back fence and the way the yard lights snapped on like stars at 6 o'clock. When he scraped the last streak of cream from the plate, he tapped the fork thoughtfully and asked if I ever missed snow. Sometimes I said, but Texas has its own kind of quiet after a holiday. He nodded as if we'd agreed on a fact of science. The moment felt ordinary and holy at once, like a church with no roof. After Avin slipped out, I cracked the door. Celine's voice drifted from the kitchen light, and efficient the way people sound when they are arranging furniture they don't intend to sit on. "We'll do Christmas Eve here," she said into her phone, "and I'll handle the roast and the decor. Lyle can pick up wine. Martha will bring her famous sweet potatoes, and Alan's in charge of the playlist." She paused, then laughed. "Thank yous, I'll draft a little note for the group text. Martha, Alan, the kids. Pastor Jim, yes, all the contributors." She did not say my name. Not once. I closed the door with care, as if sound alone could bruise me further. It wasn't new, not really. You can be left out without anyone needing to point a finger. But hearing the list roll out like a receipt and finding no line for me that pinched. I pressed my palm to my sternum, felt the steady thud there, and told myself the truth erasure often begins as politeness. You don't need to storm a room when you can simply act as though someone never entered it. A drawer slid. Ice tumbled in a glass. "We'll make it nice." She continued candles, carols, matching pajamas for the photos. "I'll send the schedule so everyone knows when to arrive." She laughed again, a bright sound that somehow made the rooms feel colder. I pictured the text, cheerful, efficient, full of boxes ticked. I could almost see the bullet points lining up to prove how loved and organized it all was. I sat at the edge of the bed, hands folded, and let the pang move through me like a tide that knew its shoreline. Love is not a spreadsheet, I thought. It remembers without being reminded. I dressed slowly, buttoning a plain cardigan as if suiting up for weather only I could feel. Down the hall, a vacuum started, then stopped. The house cleared its throat. I sat again on the bed and let the quiet return. I thought of last night, of Lyle's eyes fixed on his phone, while Celine spoke of proper care, and of how the word care can be bent until it resembles a cage. Aven's small warmth was a lighthouse in that memory, a circle of light I could stand in. I drew a long breath and made a decision I did not speak aloud. I would watch, without announcing that I was watching. I would record with the oldest instruments I owned attention, patience, and the stubborn tick of a mother's love. If there was a plan, it would show its seams. I would not volunteer my disappearance. Not today, not ever. And when the time came to answer, I would do it in a voice steady enough to carry across any room, no matter where they tried to seat me. Celine's words that morning were dressed in sugar, but I could already taste the bitterness hiding underneath. Before I left the room, I slipped the empty plate into a trash bag, smoothing crinkled plastic as if it were a crumpled page. Small order, small mercy. I would start with that. The house at dusk felt unnervingly perfect, as if someone had pressed pause on a magazine spread. Rosemary simmered in Celine's kitchen, filling the air with a fragrance too carefully chosen to be homely. Outside River Oaks quieted into its Sunday hush-trimmed hedges, lighted windows, the faint hum of air conditioning units doing their endless work. I cleared the dining nook after supper, stacking plates, folding napkins, pretending not to hear Celine and Lyle's hushed voices from the study. They spoke in the clipped, efficient tones of people managing a business rather than a home. When I carried a receipt to the mudroom, I noticed the sideboard drawer left slightly ajar. An ordinary mistake, except Celine didn't make mistakes with drawers. My hand hovered unsure. For 65 years, I'd lived by rules of courtesy of minding my own. But survival is not a courtesy. I pulled it open. Inside lay folders labeled with Celine's tidy script, Utilities Mortgage Family Care. That last one sent a pulse through me. My name peeked from a manila envelope tucked inside. I froze, fingers trembling. Was it intrusion to look yes? But what about intrusion when others take pen to paper and erase your rights without your consent? I inhaled, steadying, then slid the envelope free. The papers unfolded crisp and official, a language I knew too well from years working in a law office. Durable power of attorney. Health care proxy. The words crawled like ants. Appoint Celine Crow to act as agent. Manage finances. Authorize placement. In the event of incapacity. My name inked in neat black. My son's signature beside it. A notary stamp. A witness name, I recognized one of Celine's boutique friends, a woman who'd once smiled too long at a charity gala. 2 weeks ago, dated neatly in the top corner. 2 weeks. My pulse slammed. This wasn't hypothetical. It was done. I forced my breathing, quiet eyes cataloging every clause, every phrase. Authorize placement. Manage her finances. As if I were already gone, as if the woman standing in her own shoes at that moment had vanished from the legal record. My skin prickled cold. I slid the pages back into the envelope back into the drawer back to its exact position, a silent archivist of my own erasure. Later, I tested the ground with care. Over tea, I asked Lyle softly about bills. Nothing direct, nothing that could sound accusatory. He shifted eyes flitting towards Celine before he mumbled something vague about automatic payments. That glance, brief, guilty, seeking her permission, cut deeper than any signed page. He'd already chosen where to stand, and it wasn't beside me. My silence then became my shield. I folded my questions inside my chest the way a soldier folds maps before a long march. I would not expose what I knew, not yet. In the kitchen, Celine played hostess on speakerphone, her tone honeyed and light. Continuity of care, she cooed structured environment, peace of mind. She never said my name, just she as though I were a problematic item in need of storage. I rinsed cups and dried them with careful precision, my movements so calm they unsettled even me. 30 years in a law office had taught me the power of composure. The angrier they want you to be, the calmer you must remain. Lyle Celine called, "Can you drive Avon to Liam's?" Her voice sharpened around the edges of kindness. Lyle nodded, rising quickly, but Avon shook his head. "I'll stay with Grandma," a child's simple statement. Yet I watched Celine's jaw tighten, her smile crack for half a heartbeat before snapping back in place. That small loyalty meant more than I could ever say aloud in that kitchen, with its spotless counters and stainless appliances reflecting our distorted faces. Later that evening, Avon slipped a folded paper into my hand like contraband. "Don't show Mom," he whispered. I opened it to find a drawing in colored pencil, me wearing a cape standing tall between him and a shadowy shape, scribbled dark and labeled Noise. Above it, he had scrawled, "My quiet hero." The breath caught in my throat. I smoothed the paper with fingers that had filed documents signed, checks, packed lunches, buried a husband. "You're my quiet hero, Grandma," he whispered again. So earnest my eyes burned. I steadied my voice, asked him about School Robotics Club, his latest book. Anchoring him anchored me. That night in the guest room, I opened my Bible and slipped inside a fresh sheet of paper. I wrote in my neatest hand document titles, dates, witness name, notary seal. Facts, not fears. I folded the note next to the letter my late husband had once written me, a reminder that someone had seen me whole. Then I closed the cover. The Bible now a vault holding both faith and evidence. I sat back calm in a way only strategy can make you. Not calm because it doesn't hurt, but calm because you know hurt can be weaponized against you. Observe, record, wait, choose the right moment to act. That had been my craft for decades. It would serve me again. The house from the curb gleamed polished and prosperous that night, every window lit, every hedge manicured. But the shine couldn't disguise what I had seen. A document can be sharper than any knife, and Celine had already begun cutting. The Houston sun was unseasonably bright for late November, its glare bouncing off the tidy brick driveways of River Oaks. I stepped out for a walk, hoping the air might clear my mind of papers and signatures I couldn't unsee. My shoes crunched the sidewalk gravel as I passed manicured lawns that whispered perfection. Ophélie Céline's favorite neighborhood companion spotted me from her front steps. She approached with a smile that bent too tightly at the corners. "Oh, Darlene," she cooed, touching my elbow like I was fragile crystal. "I heard you've been a little forgetful lately, dear. That must be tough for your family." Her words hit like a slap delivered with lace gloves. Forgetful, tough for my family. Those weren't her inventions. They were seeds carried straight from Celine's lips. I froze my breath shallow. "Excuse me." I asked softly, though I knew better than to show offense too quickly. Ophélie's eyes darted uncomfortable, but she covered it with a shrug. "Oh, you know. Just things neighbors talk about. Don't take it personally." She patted my hand and turned away, leaving me standing alone in the sunlight that suddenly felt harsh. By the time I rounded the block, the humiliation had settled into my skin like a rash. This wasn't idle gossip. This was a plan being set in motion. Later that afternoon, I caught Celine near the communal mailboxes, her posture flawless, her voice pitched to the perfect register of performative kindness. Two neighborhood women leaned in, nodding like students at a lecture. "It's important to keep things organized," Celine said brightly, as though offering general advice. "Sometimes older folks need a little structure, you know. Otherwise, things can get confusing for them." The words dripped like honey into poison tea. Twist S9 revealed itself in that moment, not in what she said, but in what she wanted them to believe, that I was slipping, that I couldn't be trusted with my own life. I stood behind the hedge, my blood thrumming in my ears. Lyle passed by on his way to the driveway, briefcase in hand. For one fragile second, I thought he might correct her, offer me the dignity of defense. Instead, he gave me a stiff nod, his eyes sliding away. His silence once again granted her the stage. I turned, swallowing the urge to shout across the courtyard. Dignity, I reminded myself. Dignity sharpens more than rage ever will. By sundown, I understood the rumor was spreading. Ophélie stood outside with another couple, her voice lowered in theatrical pity. "Poor family," she murmured loud enough for me to hear. "She's getting so forgetful. I can't imagine how hard that must be for them." Her hand covered her mouth as if concealing grief, but her eyes gleamed with self-importance. Twist S10 landed with clarity. This was no longer private. Celine's whisper campaign had its first echo, and it rang across the neighborhood like a church bell, announcing my decline. I walked past, chin raised, refusing to grant Ophélie the satisfaction of a reaction. Inside, though, my heart hammered. It wasn't fear anymore, it was recognition. Celine wasn't merely cruel in her kitchen, she was strategic in the street. That night, I returned to the guest room and pulled my notebook from the drawer. Instead of weeping into my pillow, I began writing. Date, time, exact words, witnesses. The page filled with evidence, not emotion. Celine's rumor would not float freely in the air. I would weigh it down with ink and fact. I unfolded Avon's drawing once more. The cape he sketched around my shoulders had no power but the one I gave it. Tonight, it gave me fuel. If Celine wants a war of whispers, I told the quiet room I'll answer with truth carved in stone. My vow was silent but firm, stitched into the very paper I wrote upon. The first seeds had been planted, yes, but so had my resolve to harvest every lie she sowed. The house gleamed as if nothing were wrong, but I knew better. Wars don't always start with battles. Sometimes they start with whispers. Celine insisted on driving me, offering it like a favor she was done giving. "Traffic's a mess near the loop," she told Lyle, voice syrupy. "I'll make sure your mom's well taken care of." He nodded, grateful for solutions he didn't have to make. I picked up my purse and let the silence stand. Gratitude without effort looks a lot like permission. The clinic sat in a cream stucco building beneath live oaks. Inside, headlines scrolled on muted televisions. The receptionist stapled forms in time with the wall clock. Antiseptic tinged the air. Selene drifted to the counter with an envelope folded in thirds. The young receptionist read it, composed her face, then slid the paper into my file with bureaucratic grace. "Insurance card, Miss Hale?" she asked. I handed it over steady. Selene sat beside me, smiling for the room. To strangers, we were family, considerate, and organized. To me, the lobby lights hummed like interrogation lamps. A nurse called my name. Vitals, height, the gentle tyranny of routine. Alone in the exam room, I heard voices through the wall. Selene's tone, smooth as polished stone. Just the usual checkup. "We've noticed little things." Dr. Kaplan entered, wearing his practiced calm. He'd treated us for years. He knew my history, my husband's last winter. Today, his eyes paused on the chart a second too long. "Good to see you, Darlene," he said. "How have you been sleeping lightly? Holidays keep the mind busy." He nodded. "What day is it? Tuesday, December 5th, and the year 2024. "I'm going to say 3 words," he said. "Repeat them now and again in a few minutes. Apple, river, penny." I placed them back on his desk in the same order. There it was, a cognitive screen disguised as chat. Selene perched in the corner coat, neat over her knees, her concern tailored to fit any audience. Heat touched my cheeks. I folded my hands and let the test continue. "Draw a clock." I drew a circle, set the numbers, angled the hands to 10 past 11. "Where do you live?" I gave the address and zip code. I recited my son's birthday, my late husband's last 4, the name of my first supervisor at the county clerk's office. Selene waited for a stumble that didn't come. He asked for the 3 words again. Apple, river, penny. His posture softened from testing to care. Lungs, heart questions about diet, then a glance toward the door. "Anything stressing you at home?" he asked gently. "My routine has changed," I said, "true and insufficient. I've been walking more." "That's good." He lowered his voice. "If you ever want to discuss more, call me." I thanked him. At the desk, the nurse asked Selene to sign an updated contact sheet. She signed as lightly as if approving a latte. I requested the after-visit summary. The printout was crisp blood pressure, weight recommendations, and at the bottom, a small tag, discussed mild memory concerns per caregiver. The words sat on the page like a stain that won't lift. Outside, Houston wore a pale winter blue. Selene hummed along with the radio. "That went well," she said, turning on to Kirby. "It's better to be proactive plans in place and all." "What plans?" I asked, mild as steam. "Oh, nothing dramatic. Support, structure. Holidays can be confusing." I remembered the 3 words I said. "Of course you did." She answered, a laugh soft as tissue. At a red light, she reapplied lipstick, vanilla sweet. "Lyle worries," she added. "Lyle worries," I repeated, and let the words cool between us. Back at the house, she set the papers on the island like a receipt. I slid them into my purse and went to the guest room. I copied the summary on my small printer, underlined the tag, and dated the page. Then I wrote a short account, the envelope, the receptionist's composure, each test, each answer. Dr. Kaplan's offer, the exact phrasing of that final sentence. I filed it under the list I'd started the night before: witness names, notary stamp dates. Before I closed the folder, I added 1 more page Avon's drawing. Crayon cape. A small figure facing a shape labeled noise. I tucked it into a manila envelope and hid it behind the winter duvet on the closet's top shelf, the one no one touches until February. Selene knocked, bright as noon. "Tea." "In a minute," I said. I sat on the bed and counted breaths until my pulse steadied. A rumor had slipped from a neighbor's mouth to a medical record in 2 days. From there, it could walk into a courtroom wearing a suit and a smile. Righteous anger would not defeat a paper trail. Evidence would. Dates. Copies. Quiet. I pressed my palm to the manila envelope and felt the soft give of crayon wax, the stubborn texture of a child's line. Even a child's truth can cut through an adult's lie. I rose, smoothed the bedspread, and opened the door. That went well, I told her again, and smiled in a way that didn't show teeth. In the kitchen, she poured tea, rehearing her benevolence for an invisible audience. I let the cup warm my hands and asked neutral questions: clinic hours, parking validation, the nurse's name details that revealed how much of today she had staged. When the house quieted, I made a second copy of the summary, sealed it, and wrote Silas on the front. I would mail it to my old paralegal friend with a note that said, "Hold for me." If Selene preferred whispers, I would answer with paper that refuses to vanish. Back in my room, I drew a small grid in my planner date, incident witness, document storage. I listed the powers of attorney, the boutique clerk's signature, the notary's stamp, Dr. Kaplan's exact phrasing. I added tomorrow's task call, the bank confirm. Beneficiaries locate the safe deposit key. The hallway clock ticked steady as a metronome. I matched its tempo. Patience carried correctly can be a weapon. Selene spent late afternoon sunk into the sofa, phone cupped like a seashell. Lyle had gone back to the office, grateful to trade our quiet battlefield for spreadsheets. I rinsed mint in the sink and set a kettle on, letting the kitchen take on a clean, hopeful smell. The house went hush at this hour, AC breathing fridge, ticking a dog collar, jingling somewhere on the street. I laid out 2 mugs, though I'd invited no one. Habit or hope. Sneakers whispered on tile, and Avon slipped in with a sketchbook hugged to her chest. "Grandma, can I show you something?" she asked, voice pitched to avoid adult radar. I nodded to the chair by the window. We sat close enough to share the lamp. Her fingers were smudged with colored wax. I poured tea, hers cooled with milk, mine bright with mint, and for a rare minute the house felt like a place that remembered us kindly. She turned pages with ceremony. A robot made of boxes, a blue dog wearing a crown, a stick figure classroom where the sun had a smile. "There's one more," she said, testing my face. She flipped to a page where the colors went darker. 2 tall shapes leaned together beneath a staircase. Over their heads, a storm of scribbles hung like moths. Beside one figure, Mom. The other, Grandma Isolde. My thumb paused midair. "What made you draw this, honey?" I kept my voice level the way you do for splinters and secrets. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. "I went for water and they didn't see me." Mom and Grandma Isolde were in the hallway. They said it was almost time to send you to a place for old people where nurses make sure you take naps. Mom said you could sign if you were sleepy. Grandma Isolde said they could sign if you forgot. I remembered the words, so I drew them. The room tilted a degree like a boat catching a wake. From the other side of the house came Celine's sugar-sweet lilt for speakerphone. "We're managing," she told someone. "It's about safety and routine." She never says my name. She says she. "Did they see you?" I asked. Avon shook her head. I hid on the stairs. Then I drew it with the dark crayons. Her small nail tapped the cloud of scribbles. "That's whisper noise." I didn't know how to spell the words. "You did perfectly," I said, and meant it more than she knew. Children tell the truth before adults sand it down to fit a story. I studied the page as if it were a contract. 2 bodies, a plant, the railings line, the mouth on the figure labeled Mom, a slash tilted like a knife. On the other, a long strap purse. Isolde's hardware clicks when she turns. Across the top, Avon pressed a band of indigo, night. In the margin, she'd drawn me in a cape. "You keep the noise away," she said. My throat tightened. "Thank you," I said, because thank you is what you say when someone hands you a life raft on calm water. You suddenly recognize as dangerous. "May I hold this for a while?" She hesitated, then nodded. "But you have to hide it. Mom says art is messy on the counters. I know a place." I folded the page along its seam with care and slid it into an old community cookbook whose spine already knew how to keep confidences. Celine's voice drifted nearer. "Avon, you're not bothering. Grandma, are you?" We both stilled. No Mom Avon called bright as brass. Footsteps paused, listening, then moved on. "Are you going to have to go to the place?" Avon asked. That was the hardest question anchored in a child's fear that love can be moved like furniture. No, I said, steady and plain. No one gets to move me like a chair. I didn't add the rest, the notes slipped into files, the papers I'd found, because childhood should be spared adult paperwork. You know what I do when I'm scared, I asked. I make a plan. Plans are maps. They give your feet somewhere to go. What's the plan? First, I keep your drawings safe. Then I pay attention and write down the true things I see. And I look for grown-ups who listen with both ears. Like Mr. Benjamin at church, she asked. Exactly. The name warmed me. So did the thought of a lawyer who still remembers my husband's will. She relaxed enough to eat a cookie. Out in the living room, Selene laughed at something on her screen. The sound bounced lightly, harmless to anyone who didn't know what it could do. We carried our mugs to the sink together. I washed while Avon rinsed a little assembly line of ordinary care. When she left for homework, I took the folded drawing upstairs and slid it under my mattress toward the headboard. The old house rule in my mind, don't snoop, don't pry, had been replaced by a new one, protect the record. At my desk, I opened a notebook and described the picture as if for a clerk, 2 adult female voices. A place referenced, mention of signing for me, time about 10:40 p.m., location main stairwell, witness child. I underlined witness. Truth from a child arrives without agenda. That's why some adults rush to call it imagination. Before I closed the notebook, I added a line only I would read as a vow, cape against noise. If Selene tried to drown me beneath a story about confusion, I would answer with the steady tide of facts. I kissed Avon goodnight and left her door cracked the width she prefers. Downstairs, the house gleamed for showings that would never come. I stood in the doorway and listened to the quiet I have loved all my life, the kind that lets you hear your own name. Then I turned off the lamp and followed my plan to its next small step. I tucked a copy of the drawing into my Bible behind the flyleaf, where my husband once wrote our address in his neat, stubborn script. 2 anchors lived there now, his hand her crayons. Between them, I felt held. The place for old people, Avon had said. A place with locked doors and good intentions. A place you do not enter by accident. If they thought a sleepy pen could send me there, they had misread the woman who taught their boy to tie his shoes and their child to seatbelts and secrets. Back in bed, I touched the edge of the paper beneath the mattress. It felt small and strong the way good evidence does. Somewhere in the house, a notification chimed, and Selene's soft voice answered. Mine did not. I had work to do that used silence and the steady scratch of a pen. Before sleep came, I repeated my plan like prayer, gather date, hide wait until the truth when asked. I slept little. Selene's soft edges, Isolde's clipped certainty, and Avon's brave crayon looped across the ceiling. By first light, Houston was still. I decided what a grown woman does when whispers harden into plans, stop relying on memory, start building a record. Coffee steadied my hands. I moved like any Thursday, rinsed a mug, folded a towel, scattered crumbs on the sill, while a hinge turned inside me. I remembered Lyle's old tape recorder. He once recorded cicadas proud of bottling a sound no hand could hold. If it still worked, it could hold something else, now Selene's own voice. She drifted in, dressed in gray, a quiet wall. Morning, she said, sweet as syrup. Her phone glowed. Busy day. Insurance stuff. The word floated like bait. I smiled like a woman who doesn't bite. When she retreated to the sunroom, I slipped into the garage. Light cut through window squares, dust hanging like smoke. Boxes smelled of oil and summer. I lifted lids, Halloween tax records, school projects. Beneath a papier-mâché volcano sat a storm-gray rectangle. I opened the battery door 2AAs, rattled and pressed. Record. The red eye winked. Testing, I whispered, and the machine played me back thin but intact. A small triumph. Back in the kitchen, I unfolded the newspaper. My heart tapped a code. Wait, wait, wait. The sunroom door slid. Selene's steps crossed hardwood. She likes to talk while moving as if motion could blur intention. Hi, Mom, she said to the phone voice lowered. though no one else was there. "Yes," he signed. "No, she hasn't, but we can help her along." I walked to the living room sofa, lifted a cushion, and nested the recorder deep in the corner seam, a small square truth among upholstery. I smoothed the fabric and returned to the table. Celine passed behind me, scent like rosemary and new money. "I'll be in here," she announced, then softer into the call. "Timing is everything." She sat, then paced. The recorder's red eye was hidden, but in my head it glowed. I listened for the sentence that would matter. "If she signs while we're discussing the holiday insurance updates, it won't feel scary," she murmured. "People sign those packets all the time. We'll call it continuity or convenience." A drawer slid. Pages rustled. "Uh-huh." "Yes, the proxy is ready. The notary is on call." I turned a page and sipped coffee while my pulse climbed. "No, Lyle won't make a fuss," she said, perfectly certain. "He wants calm. He always wants calm." I saw my son as a boy again, willing to let a field burn if it stayed quiet. The call drifted closer to what I needed. "We'll say the nurse at Dr. Kaplan's recommended formalizing care," she went on. "And if she hesitates, we'll remind her how confusing last week's pills were." She laughed softly. "Yes," she answered every question. "That isn't the point. The point is perception." She paused. "Worst case, she refuses. Then we wait. Paper trails can be persuasive." I tasted metal but didn't move. If you flinch, you lose the good part. She paced again. "We do not need a scene. We need signatures. She'll sign if we make it look like insurance. If not, we have the authority Lyle gave us. It's a formality." There it was clean and cold. She ended the call with a sweet murmur. "Lunch in an hour," she called hostess again. I lifted my mug and met her eyes polite as church. When she vanished down the hall, I counted 60, then 60 more the way you count when a child hides. I crossed to the sofa, knelt, and slid my hand into the seam. The recorder buzzed faintly like a jarred bee. I clicked. "Stop." I didn't play it there. I tucked the device into the pocket of my sweater, the spot where women keep grocery lists and secrets, and climbed the stairs. The guest room smelled of cotton. I shut the door quietly, then pressed play. Her words came thinner but sharper without shine. "Sign while we're discussing the holiday insurance updates. People sign those packets all the time. Perception. We have the authority Lyle gave us." I let it run to the click. The machine had done its work. I rewound the first minute and recorded a few seconds of my humming so a casual eavesdropper would find nothing obvious at the head. Then I wrapped the recorder in a faded scarf and slid it under my pillow toward the headboard beside Avon's drawing. 2 small guardians. Downstairs, the front door opened. Lyle's voice floated in, careful. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's fine," Celine sang. The house pretended to believe her. I sat on the bed until my breathing matched the AC. Evidence changes posture. You sit taller. This time I whispered to the scarf-wrapped square I have her voice. Relief warmed me more than anger. I wasn't finished. I was ready. All afternoon I moved as if nothing had changed. I chopped celery, wiped a counter, asked about the mail. But each motion had a twin shadow truth, cooling on tape. When Lyle looked at me, I held his gaze a fraction longer. He looked away first. I didn't gloat or tip my hand. Evidence is like dough. Poke it, and it collapses. Cover it. Let it rise. Night came, sprinklers ticking traffic like surf. I turned down my bed, slid a hand under the pillow to feel the wrapped machine, and let its calm weight steady me. Even strong proof is useless if found too soon, and Celine can smell secrets. So I offered an old promise: be patient, be precise, wait for the right moment. Morning slid into River Oak, soft and pale. I opened my eyes to the sound of drawers opening and closing, small thuds and rustles in the hall. Celine's silhouette drifted past the door, then into the study where she pulled folders half out and pushed them back, humming like someone tidying. But her eyes, when she glanced toward me, didn't belong to a housekeeper. They swept like a metal detector searching for what might be hidden. I propped myself on an elbow expression, calm, heart steady. The recorder was safe. Last night I had pressed it under the pillow beside Avon's drawing, both wrapped in my scarf. Still, I knew hiding places must be rotated like crops. After breakfast, I would move my written notes into a safer corner, maybe inside the hem of an old jacket that no one but me would touch. At breakfast, Selene glided about with a hostess's cheer. The air smelled of rosemary toast and dark coffee. She set plates down with the crisp precision of a server in a fine hotel. Lyle sat at the table silent, pushing eggs around. "Oh," Selene said brightly. "A reminder, let's have a quick family paperwork review at 3 this afternoon. Nothing big, just insurance alignment. Best to keep everything in order, right?" My fork paused. There it was, the trap smiling in daylight. Lyle mumbled, "Makes things simpler." He didn't meet my eyes. My years in the law office came back like muscle memory. These would not be forms for clarity, but signatures under pressure. A notary likely stood ready, pen in hand. I chewed slowly, nodded once, and decided if she thought me cornered, she was mistaken. After the dishes, I walked past the iron gates and down the shaded sidewalk. The air carried a faint scent of pine mulch from the neighbor's yard. I dialed Arthur's number. He answered on the second ring. His voice steady as it had been across 20 years of practice, cut through the static. "Darlene," he said, not Mrs. Morley, just my name plain. I gave him facts, not feelings, the planted rumor of forgetfulness, the note in Dr. Kaplan's chart, the staged paperwork review, the recorded call. He listened, didn't interrupt, then said, "Do not sign anything. Keep the recorder untouched. Document chain of custody, dates, times, where you stored it. I'll come by at 2:50, as an old friend, not as counsel. And I'll bring an envelope." By mid-afternoon, the stage was set. A notary arrived early carrying a black case and wearing a polite, neutral smile. Selene ushered her in as though welcoming a guest to tea. Lyle hovered restless, glancing at the floor. "Just a few forms," Selene said, placing them neatly on the polished oak care coordination placement, consent temporary financial delegate. She slid each across the table, tabs bright like candy wrappers. So helpful for everyone's peace of mind. I sat spine straight, glasses perched low. I read silently, finger underlining phrases, authorized placement delegate authority in the event of incapacity. I asked small, precise questions. Which statute is this aligned to? Who drafted this consent? When was this recommended? My tone was dry as parchment, enough to slow the room. Selene's smile stretched tighter. Lyle shifted in his chair, tapping his pen against the wood. Then right on cue, Arthur stepped through the doorway. "Well," he said warmly, "I hope I'm not intruding. Thought I'd drop by to see an old friend." His handshake was firm, his presence steady. Selene blinked, caught between hostess and adversary. "Of course," she said, too smooth. Arthur looked at the papers, adjusted his glasses, then set his envelope on the table. Before anyone signs, he said pleasantly, "It's worth remembering, prior instruments remain in effect unless revoked. Darlene has standing directives, financial and medical, that are still valid." He pulled copies from the envelope, crisp with notary seals, laid them gently beside Selene's glossy tabs. He continued, tone calm but carrying weight. "Texas elder law treats coercion in these matters seriously. Penalties for undue influence include civil and criminal consequences. Best to table new signatures until independent counsel reviews them." The notary froze, glancing at Selene, then at me. Selene's smile thinned to porcelain. Lyle's bravado drained. His pen slipped from his hand and rolled across the table. Arthur folded his hands, genial. "Why don't we set this aside for now?" he said. "No rush, no harm in patience." I met Selene's gaze and spoke only once. "I don't consent today." The room went silent. The notary closed her folder without a word. Chairs scraped. The forms disappeared as quickly as they'd been placed. Arthur chatted lightly about Houston traffic as he rose to leave, as if he had truly come for nothing more than a social call. But when he touched my shoulder, brief and firm, I knew the balance had shifted. That night, I wrote in my notebook, Arthur's visit didn't end the game, it changed it. And Celine never plays fair when cornered. The Sunday service ended with the quiet murmur of hymnals closing and footsteps echoing against the high rafters. I lingered at the back of the church hall, pouring coffee into a styrofoam cup, the steam curling like a veil between me and the world. Celine stood near the pastry table, her laughter soft and syrupy, as she bent close to Ophélie. Their voices carried just enough for me to catch the cadence, if not the exact words. I kept my posture calm, dignified, a woman at ease among familiar faces, though inside every nerve hummed like a warning wire. Avon moved between the craft tables and the cookie line, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He glanced back at me now and then, our quiet signal of solidarity. He wouldn't stray too far. I sipped the coffee bitter on my tongue and reminded myself today I carried no recorder, only my composure. That would have to be enough. The hum of voices blurred until Avon tugged gently at my sleeve. His face was pale eyes wide in a way a child's should never have to be. We stepped aside behind the row of winter coats hung on folding screens. His whisper came fast, urgent. "Grandma, Mommy said after New Year they'll finalize placement," she told Miss Ophélie. "She said the doctor already has notes." I felt the world tip my heart jolt, but my expression softened only for him. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered back, brushing a curl from his forehead. "Go sit with the youth group. I'll be right here." He obeyed, his little hands clutching the sketchbook he always carried, as if the pages themselves could shield him. I returned to the refreshment table, the murmur of voices slicing sharper now. Celine's tone lifted, laced with confidence. "Cleaner finances with fewer variables," she said to Ophélie, her hand brushing crumbs from her silk blouse. I held my cup steady, the hot liquid burning my palm but not my face. My phone buzzed lightly in my purse. I pulled it out, tapped Arthur, a single message accelerating, and deleted the thread before the screen even dimmed. The plan was moving faster than I'd thought, and faster than Celine realized I was moving too. By early afternoon, as the hall thinned, Vera stepped toward me. She was a woman of calm gravity, silver hair pulled back neatly, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Darlene," she said gently, her hand warm as it touched mine. I thought it might be time. She drew an envelope from her tote bag. "I kept copies," she explained. "Your husband's letters, I notarized your directives. I even filed a short statement last spring. Your capacity was clear then, and it remains so now. All authenticated. I can witness again if it ever comes to that." We moved into a quiet corner, away from Celine's laughter. My fingers unfolded the packet. There they were, seals, dates, crisp signatures that smelled faintly of ink and dust. No rumor could smudge these. "Vera," I said, my voice low but steady. "You may have just given me my lifeline." She only nodded, slipping her card into my hand. "You'll know when to use it." I tucked the envelope deep into my handbag, anchoring it under my palm, as if holding a heartbeat. For the first time in days, my chest loosened just slightly. Hope had weight again, not just shadow. That evening, the HOA clubhouse gleamed with holiday cheer. Strings of poinsettias lined the tables, casseroles steamed, and neighbors carried paper plates, heavy with potluck offerings. I stood near the poinsettia display, my smile polite listening. Celine held court with a small cluster, Ophélie among them. Her voice was velvet, but her words slipped loose. "Once she's in assisted living," she said with a laugh. "Too casual, we can streamline access. No more delays." The words hung in the air like smoke. Conversation stopped. A spoon clattered against a plate. Heads turned. Lyle coughed, staring at the floor as if the carpet might open and swallow him whole. I met Celine's gaze across the poinsettias. My voice carried calm, even gravity. "Thank you for your concern," I said to the circle at large. "For clarity, I do not consent to any placement, and my directives stand." I did not argue, did not explain. The sentence sat heavy in the room, undeniable. Neighbors exchanged looks, some sharp with disapproval, some wide with the recognition of truth overheard. Celine's smile cracked just slightly before she turned back to her plate. I walked away, plate untouched, handbag secure under my arm. Celine had given me everything I needed, and she didn't even know it. By Monday, whispers weren't enough for Celine. She brought papers. Celine set the papers on the kitchen table the way other women might set down breakfast plates. Crisp, freshly printed pages slid into neat stacks, each topped with a bright yellow tab. She smiled as if she were offering me coffee. "It's just a formality, Darlene," she said, her voice dripping with that polished sweetness she used when she wanted to disguise a demand. "Medical coordination, you know. Everyone signs these eventually." I sat down slowly, hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. Lyle was already at the table, his gaze fixed on a knot in the wood grain, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. I let my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the paper. The date in the corner struck me, first backdated 2 weeks conveniently before Thanksgiving, before the things she'd said out loud. And there it was, in cold, impersonal font designating Celine Crow as sole medical and financial proxy. I lifted my chin and studied her face. She smiled wider, as though this were a harmless favor she expected me to grant. I could hear my pulse thundering in my ears, but I steadied my hands against the oak surface. I would not give her the satisfaction of trembling. The air shifted when the front door opened. Arthur's voice carried down the hall, casual, measured. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Celine's smile faltered for the first time. Arthur stepped into the kitchen in his neatly pressed blazer, Vera just behind him. Her presence was quiet but commanding, a woman who had notarized documents longer than Celine had been alive. Arthur nodded politely to Lyle, then turned to Celine. "I heard today was important. I thought it best to stop by." Celine bristled but gestured at the table as if nothing were amiss. "We were just reviewing some necessary paperwork." Arthur picked up the first sheet, reading silently. He didn't rush. Instead, he drew Vera's envelope from his briefcase and laid out authenticated originals side by side. The contrast was immediate: dates, misaligned signatures, slanted differently. Clauses shifted. Vera leaned forward, pointing with a steady finger. "These are my notary stamps," she said, tapping the older pages. "Darlene signed these directives last spring in full competence. No transfer of authority was granted." Celine's tone sharpened, a thin edge cutting through the room. "Maybe she doesn't remember?" "I remember perfectly," I said, my voice plain steady. "I have never consented to placement. I never relinquished my authority." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Arthur's calm explanation filled it. "Any attempt to pressure an elder into signing contradictory documents can carry serious liability. Texas law is clear about undue influence." Neighbors, quietly invited as witnesses by Celine, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had expected an easy performance, perhaps a signature on cue. Instead, they were seeing the seams split. Celine's smile cracked into a snarl. "She's paranoid. You're feeding her delusions." I turned to Vera. "Would you please state what you observed at the time of my prior signing?" Vera did not hesitate. Darlene was clear, precise, and competent. I would testify to that under oath. Celine's eyes darted to Lyle. For the first time, he looked at me. His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. His silence was its own verdict, louder than words. I gathered Vera's originals into my handbag, feeling the solid weight under my palm. Celine's fury was visible now, no longer hidden behind pleasantries. But the table no longer belonged to her. Arthur's voice was calm as he rose. "We'll consider this matter closed for today. No signatures are to be taken under pressure." The notary packed up in silence. The neighbors filed out, murmuring to themselves. Lyle stared at the floor. Celine seethed, her hands clenched tight, but her performance had unraveled in front of too many witnesses to stitch back together. I stood the documents secure at my side. The war wasn't finished, I knew that. Celine wasn't finished either. but the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and for the first time, she knew it. The folder sat on Dr. Kaplan's desk, thick with notes, but for once I didn't feel small beneath its weight. He read through Arthur's letter, Vera's sworn statement, and the neat log I'd kept in my Bible. When he looked up, his eyes held regret. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm adding a formal chart addendum today," he said. His pen scratched across the page. "No observed cognitive impairment. Prior remarks reclassified as third-party collateral, not diagnosis." He leaned back, sighing. "I'm sorry I let someone else's whispers sway my judgment. That screening, it should not have been framed that way." He slid printed copies across to me, crisp official. I tucked them carefully into my handbag, the weight of vindication grounding me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a crack in the storm daylight pushing through. Arthur's office smelled faintly of leather and cedar oil, familiar from the years I'd filed briefs in law firms. The table was wide, the air taut with expectation. Celine sat to my left chin, lifted arms folded. Lyle hunched slightly, a man shrinking inside his own skin. Vera sat opposite, quiet as stone. Arthur cleared his throat. "We'll be concise." He pressed a button and the old tape recorder's wheels began to spin. Celine's own voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "She'll sign if we make her think it's just insurance papers. After the New Year placement is final." Celine's composure cracked. Her nails drummed the armrest. Arthur didn't pause. Combined with the exposure at the table last week and corroborated by community witnesses who overheard her public remarks, he nodded toward Vera. This pattern demonstrates undue influence. Legally, it borders on elder abuse and defamation. He laid out forms deliberate and final. First, a non-consent affidavit notarized today. Mrs. Hartwell refuses any placement. Second, cease and desist letters with written retractions to Dr. Kaplan's office and the HOA board. Third, a standing agreement, no paperwork shall be presented without independent counsel present. Vera notarized each document, steady hand, clear seal. Celine's lips pressed white. Lyle's eyes glistened. He rasped, "Mom, I'm sorry." I met his gaze steady but not unkind. "Change isn't a sentence, Lyle. It's a practice. If you mean it, you'll show it." The recorder clicked off. The silence it left was heavier than the words. By Wednesday, the HOA email went out. Correction concerns regarding Mrs. Hartwell were mischaracterizations. Her directives remain in effect. Vera's signature shone beneath it. At the mailbox, Ophelia busied herself with junk flyers, avoiding my eyes. The church bulletin printed a simple note: all inquiries regarding family matters to be directed through counsel. The air of suspicion that had clung to me lifted in small, perceptible ways. Neighbors who once tilted their heads with pity now nodded briskly. Doors opening without rehearsed smiles. The whispers had dulled. The teeth were gone. On Friday, I moved in daylight. No bags hidden under cover of night. No hurried footsteps. Arthur's paralegal arranged utilities. Vera placed a clay pot of rosemary by the sink, its scent sharp clean. My new apartment in the museum district was modest sunlight pooling on the wood floor. I hung Avon's drawing, first the crayon cape, and the word noise, a small boy's truth more piercing than any affidavit. The room felt like air after rain, alive with quiet possibility. That evening, I found an envelope slid under my door. Lyle's handwriting apology in uneven strokes. I was blind. I want to make it right. I read it twice, then wrote back on the margin of a grocery list: counseling, honesty, time, and no contact with paperwork. Boundaries clear as law. Avon arrived the next day, a robotics club flyer clutched in her hand. "Grandma, can we build it here?" Her eyes lit the small space brighter than the lamp. I set out tea and nodded. "We'll start tomorrow, right at this table." As dusk folded over the city, I brewed a cup and sat by the window, the framed drawing glowing in the slanting light. I had once left my son's house in fear, slipping into the night unseen. Now I walked out under the sun, steady and unafraid. This time, I didn't walk alone. Looking back, I realize my story isn't just about surviving betrayal, it's about reclaiming dignity when others try to erase your voice. In life, we can't always control what people say or do to us, but we can control how we respond. I learned that quiet strength, clear boundaries, and trusted allies are more powerful than fear. And maybe that's the lesson I'd pass on. Never let whispers define your truth. Now, I'd love to hear from you what part of this journey spoke to you the most. If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments or share where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, tell me why. I welcome every perspective. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Together we can keep learning, reflecting, and building strength one story at a time.